All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So this session is all about habits of work at the secondary level. And we're going to go over a couple of different things in this session, and then there should be plenty of time during the second half to go over the questions that you guys have already put in the chat for me, and then any other questions that you guys have that come up. So before we go anywhere else, I wanted to pull up and let's see, share this tab instead. There we go. I wanted to pull up this doc and I will plop the link in the chat. Copy link. Where'd my chat go? There it is. All right, so there's the link in the chat for you. This document should have come to all of you from your principals back in August when the year started. This is the GRCSU K-12 Jump Rope Expectations 21-22 document. So for this year, we started off for the first time having a common set of expectations of how we are all using jump rope, because this is the first year that our whole supervisory union is using jump rope. Those expectations differ for K through 6 and 7 through 12. So that's why I have two different sessions so we can talk about that for those two different groups. So right now we're primarily focused on middle and high school. So under habits of work on here, which is again, that's what I'm primarily focusing on for today. We have that for, let's see, where is it in here? It's going to be entered for each course or content area. So if you're secondary, your day is probably divvied up into courses that you teach throughout the day. So you need to enter in habits of work scores for each course. Timing wise, when you look at the second bullet here, for 7 through 12, we're going to be doing this weekly. So every week you need to put in habits of work scores for every student in all of your classes. It can sound like a lot if this is a new expectation for you, but I promise once you're used to it, it's really not that bad. Many of our schools were already doing this, so we're just making sure that we now have that same expectation across the board. When you set up habits of work, please make sure that they are all set up as formative assessments. Ultimately, habits of work doesn't impact the overall score anyway, but when you set up assessments in jump rope, if you set some up as formative and some up as summative, it's going to weight them differently because that's how the program works. Summative assessments will completely blow formatives out of the water, so they won't even have an impact anymore. We want to have the assessments just all be in there the same. Habits of work includes things like homework and classwork, but you don't have to enter in every single assignment. Because we're just entering this once a week, it can be taking into account how did students do with completing homework and classwork for the week. So these might be assessments that you're not scoring for content. You're just doing some learning activities, but homework activities that you want to still indicate how is the student doing in terms of their habits, behaviors, but you don't necessarily need to put in academic scores for those types of activities. So things like in the past where teachers would have a homework check where it's either you did it or you didn't, that's the idea here. So these are things we're not actually assessing for the content, we're just looking at how did they do. You're not putting in every single assignment, you're just putting in at the end of the week, how did they do on those types of assignments or activities for the week. Oh, I just saw a question pop up in the chat about finding this document. I just put the link in the chat. This document, the file itself belongs to the coach's team drive. So if you search in your own drive, it's not going to show up. What I would recommend doing is either you can save a shortcut to the, like once you pull the doc up, you can save a shortcut into your drive, and that way you can find it later. So up, one of these, like for me, because I'm one of the owners, my folder is going to say move. But if you up here say save to drive and then say add a shortcut, you can add a shortcut to this document into whatever folder you want in your own drive, and then you can always get back to it. Okay. So the other document that if you haven't already taken a decent look at, the other big focus for us today is going to be to look at this 7 through 12 rubric for habits of work. So we're going to click on this link and switch over to that one and share this tab instead. Oh, and I see Lisa just put the link in the chat again as well. Thanks, Lisa. Okay. So this rubric was adopted by the I think it was like one of the Quarry Valley unification teams or something like that last summer, as the unified habits of work rubric that we are using for this school year. So anybody who's in the Quarry Valley schools, this is probably in your student handbook. I know for at least, I haven't looked at West Rutland's, but I know for Proctor and Pulteney, it's in the student handbook. So this is the rubric that we are using. So on here, you'll notice that down the left-hand side, we have 4 different indicators. So those are responsibility, preparedness, engagement, and attitude. And then as we go across, we can see we've got beginning, approaching, meeting, and exceeding. So that would be your 1, your 2, your 3, and your 4. Within here, again, primarily what we're looking for is that all of our students are at least meeting, because that's our expectation of where we want them to be at a minimum. So we can look down this column and see the way this rubric is set up, it just kind of gives you a bulleted list of some descriptors or criteria that the student is exhibiting if they are meeting at, for example, responsibility. Over here is kind of more of the overall statement. So for example, responsibility, it says here, students demonstrate ownership of their learning and care of the learning environment. So that's that kind of general statement. Full disclosure, I had no part in this rubric. If I were doing this, I personally like the I can statements. So I would have phrased this in the student perspective language. I demonstrate ownership of my learning and care for my learning environment. So I would have phrased it in that perspective, but ultimately it's the same idea. It's just a matter of language usage. And then down in this column, I would have rephrased it to say things like, I use technology at appropriate times and in appropriate ways. I handle community properly with care. I monitor my academic progress. I manage my time independently and productively. So those would be the kind of how I would phrase those in an I can statement version. While we have this rubric for this year, for next year, we could potentially submit suggestions. And I know that's, for me, that's a suggestion I would love to submit, just to turn the language around to that student-friendly language. The other thing you'll notice as you take a look at this rubric is there are some examples of ways that students can exceed, which is very helpful. A lot of times we are kind of like, okay, we know what everyone needs to do, but how can they really go above and beyond? So that's one of the nice things here, is it's saying they're meeting expectations and doing some of these things. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be doing all of these. It could be. Those are the kinds of conversations you want to be having as a whole staff, so that you're on the same page about what this looks like. Some of this stuff is also going to look different in different subject areas. I know that was one of the questions that had come up, is some of these things might look a little different in different content areas, and that's okay. Again, those are conversations to have as a staff. Let's see, let me take another quick glance at the chat. I see there's a question, why should they be formative if it doesn't impact the academic grade? Great question. Since it doesn't impact the academic grade, it doesn't actually matter if they're formative or summative. They just need to all be the same. So they either need to all be formative or all be summative. So the team putting the expectations together just picked formative in terms of the computer doing it. Philosophically, habits of work are just an ongoing thing that we are working on throughout the year. Summative assessments, we're usually thinking of students are demonstrating their learning in some sort of culminative way, but work habits is something that should be an ongoing process. We're constantly clarifying expectations and working on improvement throughout the year. So I think philosophically, it makes sense to be formative, but in terms of the program itself, it doesn't mathematically matter as long as they're all the same. Oh, I see. I'm sorry if you hadn't seen this rubric before. It was supposed to, because it's linked into the document that was supposed to have gone out to everybody back in August. These indicators are all set up in Jump Rope, and I'll be showing you guys those in a little bit. So from my understanding, and Lisa, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, this is the one that all 7th through 12 should be using. You should be using these indicators. I will also say I'm working in conjunction with Al and Milt to set up an eligibility report that the principals can run and use to determine eligibility. So that way it comes off of teachers' plates. As long as you guys are entering your habits of work into Jump Rope at the right times, they can run that report to and then analyze it to determine student eligibility. It's going to be dependent on these indicators. So if you're selecting other indicators, that's not going to show up in their report. So we do want to make sure that everybody is using these.
Yeah, thanks, Alina. So yeah, this expectations document, I think I emailed it out to everybody in the fall, but okay, you should have it too. And the Corey Valley team worked on it and agreed upon it. So all of these are habits of work that the Corey Valley admins and the team they worked with this summer have established. So I'm sure they're open to feedback, like Alina said, for future iterations of this rubric. But this is the one that is in place. And Alina, maybe we can work with the principals, especially the secondary principals, to just make sure that everybody sees this expectations document with this habits of work link again once this session is done.
Yep, we can do that. All right, there's another question in the chat about the formative versus summative. Yeah, if you had already set yours all up as summative, if they're always all summative, then calculation-wise, it's not going to affect anything. For semester-based classes, because I think we're all in the same, almost all of us, Rutland Town I know isn't on semesters, but if you're on semesters for next semester, I would just switch over. That way everybody is doing the same thing. We also because the formative versus summative shows up in the portal when students and parents look at it. Again, we're having a set of common expectations. We want all of that kind of information to show up the same for everyone. We don't need, it just creates more questions if they look at, well, why is this teacher saying habits of work is formative and this one is saying it's summative? So if you have the time to go back through and switch them, that would be fantastic. But if you had already built them all out, I kind of understand if it's a lot of data to switch that over. Yeah, I see another question about using a how rubric that uses language and behavior specific to your own classroom. I think as long as you're still using these indicators and the big ideas from this rubric, if you especially working on habits of work with your students in very specific contexts is fantastic. So if you work with your students and say okay, responsibility, this is the big picture for responsibility. How does that show up in art class? How does that show up in science class? How does that look in English or in PE? Absolutely. Those are great conversations to have and great adjustments to make with you and your students. If you're doing that kind of stuff, good practice would be share that kind of information with your colleagues. As long as everyone's in line with this overall rubric, that's the big picture. We want to be on the same page. But if you're going to do some more specific work in different content areas, share that with each other. There are multiple contents that are materials heavy, like, you know, science and art both have a lot of materials. So maybe you have some slightly more specific statements that you want to develop with students about how you take, like, more specifically, how do we take care of our materials? If one of you is doing that, it's great to share with each other so the other can see, like, oh yeah, no, that's great. Let me grab that and use that as well. If this rubric as is works great for you, you don't have to do any sort of more specific stuff, but you do want to make sure that you're being explicit with your students about what the expectations are. Oh, and thank you in the chat that there are teachers who don't know about this rubric. Yeah, Lisa and I will make sure we work with the principals, and we'll make sure this goes back out to everyone again as a heads up. Okay. Let me just pop over to here. Okay. So on from the other questions that I had saved, I don't see anything else specific to the rubric. Are there any other questions about this rubric itself before I go on to my next piece? Feel free to unmute or put them in the chat. Okay. All right, so, do you have to use specific domains or just how? Yes, so we do need to put in those 4 indicators. When I get to, I will be going over how that should look in Jump Rope. So I thank you for that question. I will make sure that that's in there. Okay, so the next piece I wanted to share with you guys. And I will again put this link in the chat for you. All right. So this is a doc that I had actually made last year in Proctor. We had a different rubric. It was before we had unified, but when I was teaching in Proctor, we used to have 3 statements, and I put those across the top. I adjusted it this year to share with, I'm working with Pulteney High School teachers. Lisa, if you can, Sarah just messaged me if you can let her know that I'll take care of that after the session's over. Thank you. Anyway, so when I was working on habits of work with my students, I wanted to, you know, there's a lot of questions that come up about, like, okay, well, if I'm putting in scores at the end of the week for how they did all week, how am I supposed to remember how they did at all of the indicators every day, all week? I can't be, you know, teacher brains, like, we can only manage so much information at a time. So aside from just that practical end of things, pedagogically speaking, it's a really awesome practice to have students self-assessing. So what I did on here is across the top are the 4 indicators, and I pasted the meets column language under each of those 4 indicators. That way, without having to go find another piece of paper, it's really nice and clear. This is my goal. This is where I should be at a minimum to be earning a 3 in these areas. And then going down the left-hand side, I have the days of the week. And then going across, I have those 4 indicators. So what I would have students do is put this in, oh yeah, no, this wasn't last year. This was a couple years ago. This was in Paperland before we switched to everything digital COVID land. So this was actually a couple years ago. I had this just have them, yeah, students had this in the front of their binders. And at the end of class, as we closed class each day, I had them flip to this page and assess themselves on attitude. Well, at the time, the indicators we had, but you would do that on these 4 indicators. On the side here, I had a spot for them to put notes about their day. So if they, if everything was on track and they were doing a great job, they could put something positive that happened. If they realized that their engagement was low that day, they could put a note about what they think was going on, why was their engagement low that day. If they gave themselves a 4 in any of the areas, what was their evidence? Why did they think they earned a 4 in that area? The first probably month that I was doing this with my students, I spent a lot of time on this. It's, like in elementary classrooms, they spend the first many weeks practicing routines, procedures, expectations. We sometimes forget about that a little bit as we move into secondary classrooms. The time that I spent putting in, I thought of it as a time investment with my students on making sure we had really clear expectations about what the work habits are in the classroom. That time investment paid off. I then had less of this to worry about. I didn't have my classes, I taught primarily high schoolers. Each class I kind of let stop doing the self-assessment at different points in the semester, depending on how quickly they ended up really in a good place in terms of generally meeting expectations. I had, for example, a freshman class we did this most of the semester because, or we might have even done it the whole semester because they needed that practice. But whereas a junior level class, after we did this for about the first month, they were doing what they were supposed to, and almost all generally earning 3s and 4s in their habits of work. So we didn't feel the need to continue to do this every week. We still would periodically check in on our habits of work, but we didn't need to do it every day anymore. Another thing that I would do, especially during those first few weeks, this note's about my day part. I would come around and have conversations with students, whether it was a student that I saw exhibiting really fantastic habits of work or behaviors. I would come either suggest to them or come just jot down in their little note section examples of like, here's a really awesome thing that you did today, or students that were struggling in any of these areas, either suggest to them or jot down for them, like, only completed one of the 4 formative activities today, kind of thing. So at the end of the week, I would have them flip it over, and on the back, they had a spot to give themselves an overall score for the week and why. So here they could say, okay, based on their attitude column, if they had 3s all week, then great, give myself a 3. If they had anything other than 3s all week, we had conversations about, okay, well, if I had 1 2 and 4 3s, okay, we can still get a 3 for the week, because one day at a 2, not the end of the world, we're humans, things happen. But if we start seeing 2 3 2s happening, then we probably have a 2 overall for the week. Reflect why, what was going on, what can we do better for next week. So doing that for all 4 of the areas. You may notice on here that both up top here and on the back, I have these listed in a different order than they show up on the rubric. That was intentional. On here, I have these areas listed in alphabetical order because that's the order they show up in jump rope. So as a teacher, little ease of use tip, by having those in alphabetical order, the same order they show up in jump rope, it just made it easier to then at the end of the week when students turn these in on Friday and I then put in their scores, they were in the same order. It just makes it a little easier when your brain is already a little tired and you're trying to make sure you're entering data into the correct columns. So that's the rationale for that. Any question? And this is just a tool. I know there's a couple teachers I've talked to at Rutland Town who have taken a similar kind of concept and they turn it into a Google form that they're doing with their students because they're decently heavily on their Chromebooks. So that's a fantastic way to handle this as well. Then instead of dealing with pieces of paper that can get lost, the data's all digital. If anybody's interested in that, I love Google Forms, so I would be more than happy to help anybody out with taking a look at that. I could also even kind of I hadn't done that before today, but I could, if anybody's interested, just kind of make a generic one that you could make a copy of to use with your class. I'd be more than happy to do that. So Is there a rubric, a student-friendly language out there? Right now, I don't think this is the rubric, the one that we have. But like I said, I was already planning to propose some updated language, and I know some, within the coaching team, we've talked about ways that we would love to offer up some suggestions to the team that worked on this, and I have a feeling they would be open to feedback. So at some point during the year, as the coaches get to this piece of project, we'll be reaching out to teachers to say, like, hey, here's some feedback we're going to probably offer. Do any of you have feedback you'd like to offer in terms of how this rubric is going, what's working well, what's not working well, so that way we can compile all that feedback and give it to that team so they can take a look at it. And then, and yes, yeah, the ICANN languages, yeah, that's one of the biggest ones I want to switch over. And then, okay, yeah, I'm seeing some people saying yes, Google Form version, so I'm going to write that down so I don't forget. I will absolutely make a Google Form version of this and make sure that goes out to everyone. Got to write it down, otherwise I'm going to forget. I'm sure you guys can relate. Okay. Other question. Oh, and I think what we'll do is to make sure that it gets out to everybody who might want it is I can attach both this paper version and the Google Form version. We can include those in the email that we'll send out with the expectations and the rubric. That way everything will be in one email package for you guys. Oh, interesting. Students having trouble with the ICANN language because they can be responsible even though they didn't show it that week. Ooh, that's a semantics thing. Ooh, Maybe we just do a past tense. I demonstrated preparedness by coming to class with material. And actually on here, those of you guys who take a look at this, I actually tweaked the language when I put it onto the self-assessment piece because I wanted it to be I can, except actually I didn't say I can, I just said I demonstrate. So maybe that's a piece. Maybe we pick a different word to use. Good feedback. I'm not going to remember all of this, but when it's feedback time, please put that in the feedback. That way we can consider all of that. All right, other questions thought about this? I want to make sure we also hop over to Jump Rope to see how this should look over there. Okay. All right. So let me hop over and open up a Jump Rope tab. Okay. So mine's a little funny. I've got all sorts of goofy classes here. I'm going to, for the purposes of what we're going to do here, I'm just going to make a new little fake class. Oh wait, no, I'm not going to use a fake class. I'll use this training class here because this one actually has 3 fake students in it. There's going to be some other random stuff in there, so we'll just ignore that. But I'm going to go ahead and go into the plan tab. And in here, you can see I already have done this before, so you can see the habits of work is in here. But what you're going to want to do is in your indicator list, you can see we've got all sorts of stuff. You want to bring in the habits of work indicators: attitude, engaged, prepared, and responsible. So to find those, if you haven't already pulled those specific ones in the upper right, first of all, make sure you're on the plan tab. Otherwise, you're going to have different options. In the upper right, we're going to go to create. We're going to go to indicator from bank. This is going to bring up the whole gigantic bank. To filter this, I'm going to come over here to content area. I'm going to go then over to the 3 lines that show up when you hover. And when you select the 3 lines, it brings up your filtering options. I'm going to first deselect everything and then just select habits of work. At this point, you're going to see all sorts of stuff here because over the years, different schools and grade levels have used all sorts of different things. So this is where it can be just a little bit tricky. You want to make sure that you are grabbing the correct ones. So the ones we are grabbing are attitude. And you'll see this one is tagged as all levels. We also are going to grab engaged, which again is also tagged as all levels. Not necessarily all levels, but that's what it's tagged as. Down here, we're going to grab prepared and responsible. So again, these four, they should all say all levels, and they're the single word. You have to be a little careful because prepared and preparation, I'm very sorry, those are different. So you have to make sure you grab the one that says prepared, not preparation. So again, that's why I'm pointing you over here. You want to grab the ones that say all levels. This preparation, one of the elementary schools must use that one, and that's why that's there. So please just make sure you're grabbing the right things. I've also seen, as I've kind of gone through to work on some of the habits of work stuff, there are some in here that are statements, like come to class prepared. Again, can't select that one. That's not going to work properly in the report that we're using. So please make sure that you're selecting those correct indicators. If you are not sure, please touch base with your coach, and we would be happy to hop in and make sure that you've selected the correct ones. So when you have those four selected, you're going to go ahead and click select. And I already had them here, but you would then, that would show up in your list. If you had already done this and selected some of the indicators that you don't want in your bank anymore, you would use the three dots on the side here, and you can say remove from class. Right now, I get this lovely pop-up. You cannot remove this standard because it is being used. That's a precaution to make sure you don't accidentally delete something. So in order to remove it, that then lets you know, oh, okay, I have to go to my habits of work and first unselect it. Then I can remove it from the class. And again, if you've selected the wrong indicators, I'm so sorry. That is something that's going to have to be switched over to make sure that you're using the right ones, again, so that the reporting for eligibility will work correctly. To actually set up the assessments, we're then going to go to, well, first of all, you can create a unit. Depending on how your brain works and how you like having things set up, you can set up a single unit for habits of work to use all semester, or you could set up multiple ones. I tended to set up one for each quarter. So I would have how quarter one, how quarter two, how quarter three, and so on. That way I could keep all of the assignments for each week in one place in this list. If you didn't already know, if you click on a unit, it hides the assignments. So that way, when I'm not using that set of assignments, I can hide them. Same thing goes for on the grade tab. If it's organized by a unit, you can collapse them to hide them and get them out of the way. So to actually create one, we're going to go to create, and then we're going to go to new assessment. I'm going to just make it in this class, but if you have multiple sections, or if you want to just make this for all of your classes because you need to do it for all of your classes, when you select it, you can then, my list looks a little messy, but you would have a list of all of your classes here, and you can select like, okay, I want to also make this for that class. I can title the assignment. So let's say I was putting in the assignment for habits of work today because it's a Friday. I know there's no kids today, but theoretically, you could then put in the title would be habits of work and then the date. Unfortunately, Jump Rope doesn't let you use a ton of characters in assignment titles. So I would put in 10.8. That would indicate October 8th. They don't let you use dashes or slashes. So, but periods are allowed. So that's what we tend to do. And then here's where I would assign it to my habits of work unit. Here for type is where I'm going to select formative. And then the date, I would put in today's date. Dates are going to be important. Again, that's how the report is dependent on the dates. For most of the schools that I've heard from, which is not all of them, they have decided that as a school, they're going to be having the habits of work for the week. Assignment is every Friday. Even if teachers don't have time to enter them on the Friday, they're setting up the assignment for Friday and then saying that the scores will be in at some point by the end of the day on Monday. That way, if you don't have prep last block and you need to leave and take care of stuff over the weekend or put your previous week scores in on Monday, if that's what your school's expectation is. Like, I know that's the expectation at Poultney. So if that's your school's expectation, then that's fine, but you still want to make sure the date is the same across the board, because again, the report for eligibility is going to be dependent on those dates. We also want to make sure it's looking the same. We have students in different classes. We have, parents with different students in different grades. So that's how we want to make sure it shows up in Jump Rope. That way, it's the same across the board. Okay, I see a couple of questions coming in. Okay. So there's a question in the chat about tying habits of work to specific assignments. Though that is a functionality, so I'm gonna just hit save right here for now. Oh, sorry, cancel. No, sorry, one more step and then I'll show that. I've selected all this stuff. I have to check off the indicators. Check off all 4 indicators and then click save, and then you've saved that assignment. So what that question is asking is about things like, okay, there's this formative that in this example, this formative is going to be looking at these 3 indicators. Can we also edit this and then select, I'm going to also tag, prepared. While technically you can do that, as an SU, we decided that is not something that we're going to do because it is inconsistent if people are tagging different assignments in different ways and using this in different ways. And because we want it to be consistent across the board, that is not a practice that we're going to do, even though that is a function of Jump Rope. We're going to have everybody just input the scores, 1 score for each of the 4 indicators, once per week. And that's it. That's our frequency. For your own purposes, if you would like to keep track of things for particular assignments or particular units or anything like that, you're absolutely welcome to do that. But that's not going to go into our reporting because, again, we want to have this consistent throughout the SU. Yes, I'm sorry about this information was all out in August. I'm sorry that we didn't have, there was a session where we kind of went over some of this stuff, but not to this extent. That's why we're offering it now, because we knew that there was a need to go over this. If anybody is in the boat where they're like, oh, I have a whole bunch of stuff I have to adjust or switch, touch base with your coach. We can probably help you find shortcuts and ways to get your gradebook adjusted and updated the quickest way possible. So I see one of the people asking the question, you're in one of my buildings. Let me know. I will be happy to come help you get that switched. All right, there's another question. The trouble with tagging it to a specific assignment. So there's a question about if measuring the students' preparedness when they do the work or at the end of the week, does it make any difference other than the ease or challenge of tracking? The dates is what's going to make a difference. So if your assignments are only ever due on Fridays, then theoretically in calculation lands, that would potentially work. However, if you have assignments due on a different day of the week, that's not going to work for the eligibility report that we're working on. Also, if you, it's gonna show up different if different teachers. Yeah, I was gonna get to that. There's some stuff going on because there's The report is a little complicated. Unfortunately, the way the eligibility policy is currently written, there isn't one nice, simple, easy way to just run an eligibility report and say like, okay, based on the habits of work that are entered, these are the students who are eligible or ineligible. It's a little messy, which is why it's also taking us a little while to get it done. And because of that, no, we have to all be entering stuff in the same way. Yes, and so there's another question about reporting. Yes, we know how things have been done at the different schools and whatnot. There's some other pieces that in the policy, there were some gray areas. There's some stuff that's that is very explicit, but there's some stuff that was gray areas that the principals wanted to make sure is being interpreted the same at all three schools. So the Corey Valley principals all met a week or two ago and reviewed the policy, jump rope, how it was all going to work, and gave the criteria to the tech and coaches to say, okay, this is what we've decided on to answer some of those gray area pieces. So we're working on the reporting to see, can we do exactly what they've decided on? And provided that that is all done, which is Milton and I are almost done with it. We're waiting to hear back from Jump Rope on one thing. Provided that's done for next week, then that information will also go out to all of you guys. We were just waiting until that report was done. I was hoping it was going to be done for today, but it's not. So apologies on that. Okay. So then from here, let's see. Okay, so where am I on this? Oh, that's right, I was looking at an assignment. Okay, so at this point, I've now got 2 habits of work in here. I'm gonna now hop on over to the grade tab. And at this point, you can see here's that habits of work unit. And I see the time, we're just about out of time. So I wanna make sure that we wrap up here. I just wanted to show you, again, having them in a unit is nice. You can collapse it. That way on Fridays or Mondays or whenever you do your work habits, you can open the unit up, plug in your scores, and then hide it again. You can also, as you like, okay, had I entered my scores in for September, I can hide that particular week. And that way, each time you open it up, your new week is just right there. One other tidbit I'll just throw out there real quickly. There is a capability to do sharing between teachers within the same school. So I know at Proctor and at Poultney, because those are schools I'm familiar with, that there has been one person who set up habits of work for the semester and then shared that with the school. So that way all the other teachers could import that unit full of assignments right into their classes so that everybody doesn't have to go through and create and tag everything. Then you also make sure everyone has selected the correct indicators, because as long as that one person did it correctly and checks with their coach, then everybody's going to have it correct. So at West Rutland, if that's something you guys are interested in, touch base with one of your coaches and they can help you with assignment sharing and whatnot. So yeah, and Rutland Town folks, I hadn't done it with you guys yet, but that's stuff that we were talking about on Wednesday. That is something that we want to do. So I will do that with you guys too. All right. I do want to respect everyone's time. So before you go, if you can very quickly here, let me just grab the link real quick. If you can fill out, there is the link for the PD Google form. If you can please fill that out. For the PD option today, you would put in habits of work secondary, and you would put today's date. Oh, here, I'll go to share this tab instead. Here you go. So this is that exit ticket for PD. So put in habits of work secondary, today's date, and we round to the nearest hour. So just put in 1 for hours. And then here, just put a little takeaway and your name and your school and click submit. And that way you will get at some point relatively soon a certificate for your PD hour of working with me today. And that way we also have just another way of knowing that you were definitely here today with me. So If you have additional questions that I wasn't able to get to, please feel free to send them to me in an email. I am going to be in sessions all day today, so I probably won't be able to get back to you until next week. But feel free, send them my way, and or send them to any of your other building coaches. We'd all be more than happy to help. So once you're done with your exit ticket, you are all set. Thank you so much, everyone. Happy Friday and happy long weekend.